So I'm in a bit of a hurry because it's been a busy week. I haven't been able to do a lot, so this is probably going to be a short video on 2 accounts. Number 1 is there's not a lot to talk about. Number 2, this has to go up in a couple of hours. Usually I record these on Friday. I'm recording this on Saturday now because I've been so fucking goddamn busy. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about my game, which still doesn't have a name now that I think about it. That's something we gotta go ahead and fix. But not for the time being. I had hoped that in this video I could announce that I have a first playable build of the level, very much like an alpha state, but still I would have liked to announce that. The combination of me not having a lot of time this week and things just shit hitting the fan in the development process itself means that there's going to be at least another week before I can go send those out. And maybe it'll be another 2 weeks, because I've decided that I do want to do a little bit more polishing on certain things before I send it out. But we'll get to that in a moment, hopefully, unless I forget, it's not on the list. First things first, graphically I made one very important, not even a change, just an addition. And that is the addition of invincibility frames. This is both a graphical thing, but also a functional thing, because it actually functions as iframes, which is really nice. I started this with wanting the character to look transparent while in the iframe state. I looked around a little bit in the material options and discovered, okay, of course, an opaque material is just that, opaque, doesn't have any opacity parameters. So I changed it to translucent because that's what I wanted, right? Something that you can look through. And then the opacity parameter became available to use in the material. Turns out, for whatever fucking reason, it's got something to do with the fact that the engine calculates translucent materials in a certain way, and that makes sense to a certain extent. But if you set the opacity to 100% in a translucent material, you would assume, and I don't think this is a weird assumption to make, that it just behaves as an opaque material. It doesn't. It looks different. It still lets some light through. You can still see objects behind the object that has that material. And it's just generally weird. So I was given the choice between, do I really, really want this look? Because if so, on taking damage, I could just swap out all the materials, the opaque ones, for translucent ones while in the iframe state, and then switch them back to the opaque ones once I get back into a vulnerable state. I could have done that, but I had another issue. The way I modeled this character, it's a lot of separate geometry just stuck into the body, which is a pretty lousy way of modeling, I will admit. I should just like re-topologize the entire thing, and then that wouldn't be a problem. Because what happened is, because the separate geometries is not one big mesh for the character, when it becomes translucent, you can see the ends of the arms that are just stuck in the body, usually. For animation purposes, this is also a bad way to make the model, I should point out. It doesn't really have that many issues. The legs don't connect to the body, but you don't see that, and when you see it, I think it has a certain amount of charm. It reminds me a little bit of Rayman, so I actually quite like that. But the way I modeled this character isn't great. So because of that, the way it ended up looking, because of the way it's modeled, I opted to go with the other often used version of invincibility frames, and that is just making your character flicker in and out of existence. And that was very easy to just program in, because what it does right now is when I get hit, it sets a switch from iframes off to iframes on. Then it goes through a loop where it just sets me invisible for 0.1 seconds. It sets me to visible for 0.1 seconds, and then it repeats that the amount of times that I have specified, which I can tweak a little bit. So each loop is 0.2 seconds. I think it goes through the loop 10 times. So I have 2 seconds of invincibility in the end. And then when the loop has done the X number of times that I've specified, it goes on and turns off the iframes. It's a very easy system. It works great, and it was necessary because while test playing myself, I often ran into the issue where, yes, when you run into an enemy and you get damaged, you have a little bit of a recoil, like feedback, but, and this is very important, I would often get hit twice or even 3 times while doing that. And that is part of the reason why invincibility frames are necessary, to prevent those kind of bullshit scenarios, which is just frustrating when you see you get hit twice because you made one mistake. And then also just to give the player a little bit of leeway, if you get sent back, you don't want to be in a situation where you then get sent into something else that also damages you. If you just have a bit of a window there, it's just more fun generally to play. I don't know why I'm explaining invisibility frames. You've all experienced this in the past, I am sure. So moving on, some more technical stuff. I changed some level elements from just being my procedural platform blueprint to actually being a blueprint specifically designed for the function that they do. So the platforms that were flipping around, for instance, halfway through the level, I think I've shown it a couple of times, those used to be the procedural platform that I just animated in the level sequencer. And I ran into a bit of an issue there because I have a couple of those procedural platforms which are huge, and that was really running into some issues with like lighting because those were so huge and casting very, very, very big dynamic shadows. And that's very much unnecessary because most of those platforms didn't move, especially the big ones. So what I ended up doing is I made a copy of that blueprint where I now have one version that's static and one version that's movable. The static versions just make baked lighting, which is so much better for performance issues. I immediately, when I did that, saw my frame rate jump up from like 40 to like 85 on average. So that is fucking huge, because if it run at 40 FPS on my PC, like the average PC, I'm not that much more powerful than the average PC, but I'm a little bit more powerful than the average PC. So if it's 40 on mine, it's probably most 30 on the average, like based on Steam statistics, PC. And it's probably unplayable if you have anything below average. So we don't want that. So now it runs at like 85 on my PC. I think even if you don't have a great PC, it's going to run fine. Especially since I think like modeling and stuff, I'm using more vertices in certain places than is altogether necessary. So I'm going to have that optimization in other places. So yeah, I switched around a lot of the level elements to be static ones when they didn't move. The ones that do move, I made a still movable and dynamic shadow casting version of, but that's significantly less impactful now because there's only a few of those. And I figured, when I'm doing this anyway, I might as well just make like the rotating platform. It's so easy to just like make that in programming instead. So I did, and that's also presumably more optimized now. So that is all fantastic. So what else do we have? I made a checkpoint system. This was the thing that I worked on most all week. This was an absolute nightmare because the way I need to make a checkpoint system, the way most games generally make like checkpoints or like death loading or whatever systems, is just to get your character and place it at the location of the last checkpoint. The issue is that I wanted to have a system, again, I'm comparing my own game a lot to Crash Bandicoot, but the in-level experience is going to be a lot like Crash Bandicoot, because this game is heavily inspired by it. And what I want to have is, if you have a checkpoint and you make it halfway to the next checkpoint and you die, I want all the collectibles to respawn. Obviously, if I just change my position from where I died to the last checkpoint position, all those collectibles are already going to be collected. So that's not great. So I had to, what I'm doing right now is I'm just saving the game when I get to a checkpoint, and I'm loading that save when I die into a separate save slot specifically made for the checkpoint, which gets cleared when you finish the level, which that part I haven't programmed in yet, but it will. And it also gets cleared when you close the game. The only issue is that when you force close the game with something like Alt F4, it doesn't clear the checkpoint, but I probably can just make it clear the checkpoints on game starts now that I think about it. Because obviously when the game itself will be more than one level, you're not booting into the level right away, so when you go into the main menu screen, I can just wipe that save clean. So that's not going to be a problem anymore, I don't think. It was a bit of a headache to wrap my head around how the save functions work and how I can like write to them and call from them, and it didn't always make a lot of sense. There's still some things that I did. I don't know why things worked one way and didn't work the other way. but I don't need to go into too much detail about that. Just suffice to say, I had a bit of a headache getting the checkpoint and coins to cooperate, but they work now, and it's actually really good. I just need to like make a visual for it, because at the moment I just like have a stretched out sphere to indicate the checkpoints, and that's not great. But that will be done at some point. The most important thing, and it wasn't that big a deal to make, but I've made for most of the other obstacles, I've made a second variation. So every single obstacle, and this is also partly why I wanted the checkpoint system, because now when you get to an obstacle, it picks randomly between which one it moves in. They're both already like loaded into the game and stuff like that. I was thinking maybe I'll just like load them in and the other one just can stay invisible. I opted to go with it just moving in, because what I wanted to have is the idea. The idea is that you're walking through a film edit, right? And if you've ever made any sort of video, you know that oftentimes you'll swap in like shots here, shots there, a scene here, maybe this works better there, to see what ends up being the best you can make. And I wanted to convey that feeling very, very much, especially if you die. I wanted to have you be able to walk up to the same section and have a chance to get the other obstacle. So that's how it works right now, because the level resets. It resets both of the obstacles back to its unused position, and then when you get to the obstacle itself, it randomly picks one. And then if you die, it resets back to unused position, you get to the obstacle, it picks one randomly. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same one. It could be, there's a 50-50 chance. I got that save system, load system, checkpoint system working. I just need to put at the end of the level a trigger to wipe the save, and on game load when I actually have a menu screen to also wipe that save, just to make sure that people don't like load into the middle of levels. And then that entire system will be done. I wanted to have a system where you could also have those obstacles that you already had loaded behind you stay the way they were. Because right now, the way it works is it just reloads the entire level and destroys all the obstacles and enemies that you've already collected. But that means that all of the obstacles that are behind you will not in fact get reloaded into their position as you died. And while that wouldn't be that difficult to program in, and I might still do it, I don't think it has much function either, because you're not going to want to go back anyway. And if you do, you might as well just restart the level. I honestly don't care. There's one thing that I want to mention though, and that these checkpoints, they work in a interesting way, because I've wanted to make a video about checkpoints for a while, and I'm still going to, but I can refer to my own game in that video, maybe, because I'm very much inspired by the way Shovel Knight does its checkpoints, where not taking the checkpoint will give you a reward. So going through the entire level with a higher risk will give you a reward, that being more money in that case. I want to have a like Crash Bandicoot style collectible where every level has a certain amount of collectibles. I want to have one for getting every single coin, the wisps, but I'm calling them coins because they serve the function of what a coin. In Crash Bandicoot it's a Wumpa fruit, in Sonic it's a ring, the main collectible. Getting every single one of those, I want to get a reward for. I want to just have a level completed reward, and that'll be the only one that's necessary for actually completing the game. But I also want a reward for going through the entire level without triggering a checkpoint. But that means that you have to be able to not trigger the checkpoint without going out of your way to like avoid a checkpoint, because that will be annoying. So the way it works right now is if you're walking, I've got my controller right here, it is on screen, I think it is. If you're walking through, you're using the analog sticks to walk, you use the X button to jump, you use the L1 and R1 buttons to do your little like dodge roll thing. The trigger buttons, the L2 and R2 buttons, will trigger the checkpoint. So you can just walk past, and without too much hassle, while you're in range, I need to visualize when you're in range still, but when you're in range, you can just push one of those buttons to trigger the checkpoint. If you're like speed running or anything, it doesn't take any more time, and you can just bolt on ahead. If you don't want to trigger the checkpoint, you just simply don't press the button. It's not too much of a hassle for the people who want to use the checkpoint. It doesn't stop you from the gameplay flow, but it does give you the option to not trigger the checkpoint. And as a matter of fact, by default, if you don't press a button, you don't trigger the checkpoint. And if you don't use checkpoints, at the end, you get a special collectible for not triggering the checkpoints in that level. That makes 3 different kinds of collectibles in each level. I think that's plenty. It just makes the game a little bit more replayable and just like gives you a reason to go higher with the skill ceiling. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about, because I said this video is going to be shorter, but I'm looking at how long I've been recording, and this video is not going to be shorter. I changed the Chase AI character because I was fucking around with the Move 2 node in Blueprints in Unreal, and it just didn't work that well. It was weird. It didn't complete its movement half of the time, and it just didn't go on with the rest of the programming, and it just didn't work. And I read online a lot that node just generally doesn't work that well anyway, and people recommend using behavior trees, just programming a proper AI behavior tree for that. And I figured, okay, well, let's try to do that then. And that ended up having similar issues. So I wasted quite a bit of time there, not entirely, because I can definitely now see that the way I did it before was very convoluted and overcomplicated while this option just exists in the engine. But the weirdest part about it is, it's not that it doesn't work, because when I go into a different level to test it, it works. It works exactly the way I programmed it in. That is, it gets to player location, it waits 0.2 seconds, it moves to the player location, it waits 0.2 seconds, and it moves back to its original spawn location. And then it repeats. That's the way it's implemented right now. It's going to have a little bit more complexity to it when it actually gets developed fully, because what I want to have is when you're inside of a certain range of the enemy, it runs towards you, and while you're inside of the range, it just keeps going after you rather than going back to its starting position every single time. And then when you exit that range, it goes back to its starting position. That's what I want it to do. And it's not going to be that difficult to make that. But the issue is, in the level that I want to use it in right now, it doesn't work. In other levels, again, it does. If I just go into one of my other test levels, it does exactly what I programmed it to do. It doesn't in my video editing timeline level, and I don't know why. I figured maybe it's got something to do with the fact that it's like this procedurally stretched up floor that I'm using, because these platforms that I'm using, they're maybe a little bit weird, and I can see that maybe the engine doesn't really do too much with that. Nothing good anyway. But then going into the different levels, I used that exact same actor as the ground to test on, and it still works. It's literally something about the level that I'm using it in which makes it not work, and I don't know what it is. And it's infuriating. So I've spent at least 5 or 6 hours trying to troubleshoot this, trying to Google, see if anybody has the same issue, because I'll explain. If like 1 out of 10 people watching this knows, please do enlighten me what it might be. Again, keep in mind that it only does this in the one level and not other levels. But what it does is it gets my location, it waits 0.2 seconds, it moves to my location, and then it just stands there. So I thought, okay, let's have it print a success or fail message upon success or fail. It always fails. It moves to the location that I specified, but then it doesn't recognize that as being a successful move. And after like 5 or so or 6 or so seconds, it just figures, I haven't moved in a while. This must be a fail. And then it returns a fail. I have no idea how or why. I have tried to play around with the acceptance radius, which is just telling you, okay, if you're within this many units of the target location, that's good enough. I've set it to like 5,000, 1,000 to 500, a lot of different values. It just altogether ignores that value, and I am also not entirely sure why. But there's a lot of things going weirdly with this AI behavior. So what I'm thinking right now is that this is just not going to work. I'm going to need to come up with a different kind of enemy or a different kind of obstacle to replace those two obstacles with. Because I had a very easy version of it where it was just 2 of them, and then the end of the level was going to be like 10, 15, something like that of them back to back to back to back to just have a chaotic mass of a time. And if you get really good at it, it will be very satisfying because you could jump from one onto the other and have an infinite jumping sequence there without ever touching the ground. That was my idea. Clearly, as I'm going to walk in this level, I'm going to keep the AI in, and maybe in a different level I'll test if it works there, and if it works there I'll refine it to exactly how I want it to work, but not before I know that it will actually work. So what I'm thinking right now is having the final section just be a couple of flying enemies instead, where you jump from one enemy onto the other, onto the other, onto the other, to recreate that feeling, but have it a little bit more easy because it'll just like be going up and down. It'll just be a moving platform that despawns when you... If you watched my Crash Bandicoot Let's Play video from like a week and a half ago, I'll literally talk about this idea, and I'm just going to use that. Because that's a less dynamic, more in-your-face way of doing it, but it gets roughly the same result, I think, for the player. So I need to get onto that. And then there's a couple of polish things that I still need to do. I need to hurry up because otherwise my camera is going to shut off. There's a couple of polishing things that I still need to do. I need to start adding in at least some temporary sound effects. I need to have some visuals for like the double jump. I just want to have a little bit of a impact, a dust cloud that just goes like poof, right? When I do the double jump or double roll in midair. Those kind of things. Just a little bit of visual and audio player feedback to make the game feel a little bit more alive. Because right now it's just silent. Not a lot of things are happening visually. And I think for what the player experience of the level is going to be like, of course, there's a lot of like very not finished things in the level at the moment. But those things I think are important enough for me to implement before sending a first build to other people. So all that I'm going to need to do before I feel comfortable getting that to other people. And that might take another week, that might take another 2 weeks, but then I really do hope that I'm finally ready to start sending this fucking thing to people and get a little bit of feedback on it. Which is going to be an entire thing by itself, because I want to like make a little document, just like thank you for playing. I would very much appreciate you giving feedback and not just playing it and keeping all your thoughts to yourself, because that's the entire point of being a beta tester or whatever you want to call it, just a play tester. If possible, record your playthrough, because I really want to see people play through, not just read their notes, because I want to see what they do, where they struggle, how they struggle. What people do is a lot more relevant than what people say. And while I will be listening to what people say, I'll be taking that with a grain of salt compared to actually seeing what they do. It's a matter of, I once had a teacher of mine say a very, very good thing. And that is, when you ask for feedback, remember the problems they bring up and discard their solutions. Because they have no fucking idea what they're talking about as far as solutions go. But their problems are valid, because that's the way the consumer will be experiencing it too, seeing those problems. And then it's up to you as the creator to fix those problems and come up with solutions for that. Oftentimes, even if you're showing it to other professionals in your field, those solutions will not make a lot of sense because they don't have the feel and they're not as deeply enveloped in this project, knowing all the ins and outs of it as you do. You're the only one who can come up with the real solutions, but the problems they see will still be valid. And that's really very much the way that I'm going to go about the feedback for this project as well. I'm going to listen to the problems people run into. I'm going to absolutely ignore all the suggestions they give me how to fix it. Well, not all of them. Some technical ones I might just be happy to get. But and sometimes I might ignore the problems, because sometimes things may be considered problems by certain people and not by other people. I'll be taking you guys with me through the feedbacking process, because that can be, as a creator, as an artist, it can be rough to get feedback on something that you've sunk so much time into, and how to deal with that is a very important part of making something, and a part that's not often talked about in these kind of like videos and devlogs as far as I've ever seen. So do keep tuned for that, and I'm going to end this video because I have no idea if my camera is even recording anymore. See ya.